All right. Well, thank you all so much for being here. For those who don't know me, my name is Robert Bruce. I'm the state director for Maryland Science Olympiad. The goal of the seminar today is to give a run through of the Scilympiad testing platform, which we're planning on using in various capacities throughout our tournaments. As we kind of talked about earlier in the season, the goal is to be in person as much as possible. But whether or not our tournaments are fully virtual or whether they're partially in person, there's a we are using this platform to various degrees at every tournament this season. So this video is intended to be a resource showing the full virtual functionality, and every tournament director and every tournament will tell how the platform is actually being used at that tournament. The focus of today is assuming a full virtual tournament environment, however. And like I said, please direct any tournament-specific questions to those particular tournaments. So without further ado, let's get started. And most of today is going to be me sharing my screen to actually show you what the Scilympiad platform looks like. So this is Scilympiad. This is the Maryland version of Scilympiad specifically. The first thing to note is the URL. Scilympiad.com is everywhere, but make sure you have the proper extension because every tournament, every invitational in particular, has their own URL. We'll be using this one for regionals and state tournaments in Maryland this year. You will obviously end up on the Maryland site because you'll see giant Maryland flags, the Maryland Science Olympiad logo. So the first thing I'm going to do is focus on coaches. Before I do, just a couple of buttons just to point out where they are. On this top bar here, depending on which functionality you have, this will highlight the functions available to you. If you're a coach, you'll have a coach tab. If you're an event supervisor, you'll have an event supervisor or an ES tab. Score masters and directors will have SM, excuse me. Just a note, hiding under the resources tab here is a tab called Tournament Documents. This is where we have been posting a lot of our updates, as well as we'll post tournament schedules, and we'll try to post other important documents onto this page. So this is a very useful place to look at to see what's going on, basically. Just going back to the main screen here, you should be done registering at this point. You can see if your school's participating, but you probably know by this point. Head coaches can find their dashboard here. Students will come back and be using this button here to access the student dashboard in a little bit. The last thing I'll just note for now, I'm trying to post under the regional tournaments just some brief links and information just to make sure that it's all available. So you see that for the Montgomery College tournament in a couple weeks, the format is fully virtual, so it will be using the functions that we're talking about today. I've posted some information about the build events for that tournament. I'm not specifically going to go over this today since the focus is on Scilympiad, but we can talk about that in the Q&A. There is an updated tournament schedule and then a link to the volunteer signups. Basically, I'll just try to post some basic information here. You can see the full information under that tournament documents page, where I tend to post the news and updates for each event, including emails that get sent out to all the teams. But that's the basics of the site. Pretty simple, but it's rather intuitive and very powerful for our use. So with that, let's jump into the coaches portion of this website. So I'm under my coach account. And if we go to the head coach dashboard, let me just walk through some of the basic functions that head coaches have available to them. A lot of this, like I said, is rather intuitive, rather general functions at general times are put in the same section. So registration, for example, that's what coaches use to register their teams. Most of these functions are complete by this point. The main one that coaches will want to be aware of is to invite coaches. What we Maryland do is we use our coaches that are assigned in Scilympiad, and we use that to populate our mailing listserv for tournaments. So if you have any coaches that want to be added to the listserv, you'll want to make sure that they're invited formally in Scilympiad to the team. And any coach on a team can add new coaches. Apart from that, that's pretty much the registration tab. Most of what we'll be talking about today is the compliance tab, which, although it says compliance, really is your setup of the team in Scilympiad. So just going down the list here, upload documents. There really aren't any documents to upload unless the tournament specifically says so. But uploading it is just as simple as, oh, that's a little bit of a lie. We'll come back to that. There will be one document to upload, and that is your tournament roster. I'll double back to that when we get there. But this is just a rather intuitive menu to upload documents, and we'll come back to that. Let's jump into the student team event assignment because there's actually a large amount of function that every team needs to know here. So what this is set up to do, it's set up for you to add your students to the environment. It will create an account for them through a login ID. And this is also where students will be assigned to their events. And then the last thing this page will generally do is generate the student signed roster that every team must submit for a tournament. I've said about 4 or 5 things, so let's walk through them in intuitive fashion, because again, if you go from left to right, most of the functions that I just mentioned will this page will walk you through them. So the first one in general is the student pool that we're looking at here. And this pool will be all the students that are added to any team for a particular school. So if you're a coach and you have multiple teams with your school, this is where you'll add all of the students for all of your teams. You'll see in a minute that we can assign them to the particular teams. This page is rather intuitive. To add a student, you just simply type in the student's name, first name, last name, give them a grade level. This is for a middle school tournament, which is why they're all grade 7. And then when I hit save changes, you'll notice that a login ID pops up. Now, I'll say this again when we get to the student section. Students should not create their own account using their email on this website. Let me say that again. Students should not use email to create accounts on their website, on this website. Students will access tests using this login ID that the coaches create on this page. Again, I'll show you in a minute when we get to that section how that works, but this is what students will use. They'll create their own password. Coaches will be able to reset passwords for their students here, but hopefully students can manage their own passwords that way. From here, basically, you can keep adding all the students. You can add them, designate them as alternates. We don't use individual releases specifically in Maryland, and you don't need to worry about the registered tab. That's a bit of an outdated, function. So really, you just need to designate if they're an alternate or not. Always save changes. Make sure to save changes. The site will sometimes prompt you if you don't, but just make sure you do. And that's really it. That's how you add students. You can add them. They used to be able to do this in a table function. You can do that through import students. It has to be in a hyper-specific format, and I find this is really easy just to type it in anyways. So I would just recommend typing in the students' names this way. And then that's it for adding students. Does anybody have any questions before I go on? I've talked for a good solid couple minutes. Okay. Like I said, I'm trying to keep track. Have I missed?
Please, who assigns the login ID for students? Because I know there were confusions last year.
Can you say that again, Sergey? Sorry.
Who is assigning the login ID for each individual student?
Good question. The login ID is automatically assigned by the platform when the student is added to the list. So you can't create a specific login ID for each student. It's generated by the platform.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. There's my chat so I can make sure I'm not missing that. Okay. And all right. So now we've added all of our, let's assume we've added all of our students to all of our teams. The next thing the coach needs to do is go to this button, Students to Teams. What this does is it allows the coaches to add students to each team. Like I said, this needs to be done regardless of how many teams are done. This is the way you can assign different students to different teams for your school. But in this case, I'm just going to focus on one team in particular. So this new student on the left was just added, so they haven't been assigned yet. All I'm going to do is click on that. Let's add them to team 1, and very straightforwardly, they're added to the team. A quick notation note here, we designated student 4 as an alternate, and how that shows on this page is this little asterisk present on this page. It'll show up in a more readily available form when you get to the printed roster. That's just what that means on this page. But again, this is a really straightforward function, I think. This must be completed, but it's a really straightforward step. So hopefully that's intuitive enough. Once that's done for all your teams, now we're going to go back to the student roster. And now we're going to assign students to their particular events, literally assigning students to the tests that they're going to take in the system. I've kind of completed this already for various students, but it's literally straightforward as just clicking the boxes and just assigning to each particular event. I don't think this has been coded fully for the number of students per event, but when each coach comes to this page, they'll see different colored blocks indicating that students can only be assigned to one event in each colored block or will be restricted. You can't assign more than the allotted number of students per event. You'll see I just tried to add a third to bridges, and there's only 2 students allowed in that event, so that can't be done. One particular note, and we'll come back to talking about this event later, Write It, Do It has been split into 2 events in the Scilympiad platform, one for the writer and one for the doer. These will be linked, and I'll show you that later. But basically, you should add the writer specifically to that writer block and the doer specifically to that doer block. Apart from this, again, I think this is intuitive, and hopefully you do too. Make sure the students are assigned to the events. Make sure you save changes at all times. And once this is here, the students are now able to access their tests when the time comes. So this is how you get students assigned to each test. And the system will lock you out on tournament day after each test is taken, but this can be changed up until tournament day. All right. Please feel free to jump in with any questions. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going because there's one other important thing for me to point out on this function. So real quick, event schedules. This is just a resource document the system generates for coaches. Once the students are assigned, it'll show who's assigned to which event. Nothing's required to be done here. This can be useful just to verify the coaches are there, as well as it'll show the student ID numbers in case you want that reference. The other most important button that we're going to talk about on this page is this principal certification button. There's one major thing that we require in Maryland for teams to be able to participate, and that is a signed team roster. That team roster needs to be signed by the coach and by a principal or an administrator at the school. Unfortunately, despite the importance, this roster is a bit hidden and you have to know where to find it. But this function is found in the principal certification button. What's going to happen, we've assigned our students to the teams, and when we hit principal certification, this is going to generate a document. There we go. This is going to generate a PDF showing the school name, the teams, the students that have been assigned to the teams. It's going to have the waiver for the school to sign, and then it's going to have a place for the principal and the head coach to sign. If we do not have this form on tournament morning, we can't let the team compete. So this is paramount that teams submit this. We encourage submitting it ahead of time. We will accept it up until tournament morning, but we really encourage you to submit it ahead of time so that there are no issues.
Rob, we do not see the form.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Give me 1 second. There we go. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes, great. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so sorry about that. Again, what you're looking at, this is the roster that the platform generates. You can see the students that were assigned for each team. That alternate that I mentioned before is put into a lower box that just separates that out and indicates they're an alternate. And again, there's a spot for principal to sign. There's a spot for head coach to sign. It's paramount we have this sign form before the tournament starts, or we cannot allow the team to compete. And just to point out, I did not, if the team has multiple teams, I did not assign students to multiple teams. Let me do that real quick, just to show how that looks. But what'll happen is that page will generate multiple, one page per team, basically. Let's give that a second. And you can see now there's a second page for that second team with students on it. So that's how coaches generate all their forms for all their teams. hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to stop because of this importance to see if there are any questions up to this point.
I have one quick question regarding the team composition.
Mhm.
So by the current rules, Division B teams may not have more than 4 9th graders in their roster. And
Yeah.
then Division C teams are limited to memory serves 5 12th graders.
Yes.
Is it something that this system actually enforces, or this is something that coaches need to do to make sure they do not violate this allocation?
I have not personally checked if that's enforced. I want to say that it is. I have seen the system get annoyed if I put the wrong grades into the wrong test. Let me just show you real quick. If I try to put like, let's see. No, that keeps that. Okay. It might not. Let's work under the assumption that it doesn't. We on the tournament side will need to just verify this. I want to say no until proven otherwise, though.
That's great. Thank you.
Sure thing. Any other questions on student team event assignment and that signed team roster? No? Okay. All right. Then just to point out, signed releases, this will only be used if your tournament specifically requires it. So I'm not going to talk about it here. And then head coach dashboard obviously takes you back to the dashboard. Just to wrap up that principal certification talk, what you're going to do with it, I just clicked it again. So it's going to generate the form, sorry. But actually, let me save it real quick. Save it to the desktop. Okay. So the main way to submit this and the way we prefer it is to submit it in the system. So this is where we're going to go back to the upload documents tab under compliance, right above where we were. This is where you can now submit this form. You can put team roster as the document type. You can put a note if you want. Once you hit upload file, you'll see that it's been moved to the right side of the screen here, such that you can see that it's been uploaded. And obviously on the tournament side, we can now see that it's uploaded. So this is the preferred way that we ask that you submit team rosters. With that, those are the majority of the coach functions for me to cover at this moment. I'll talk on the back end about how coaches can appeal mainly appeal is the last piece. But unless there are no other questions on coach functions, I'm going to move into the student side. So let me go back, click back to the head coach dashboard and go back to the student team event assignment. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to write down for my own purpose the login ID here, since the system auto-generates it. And I'm going to show you how students access their test. So for student 4, we're going to start that because it's brand new in the system. You'll see that it has the login ID 1030 LA. We're going to go back to the home page. We're going to go down to student dashboard. We're going to basically ignore every other tab on this page because it's a little extra unless you want some basic tutorials. And we're going to focus on competition day, take online tests using login ID. What this does is it takes you to this page where it's asked for a login ID and password. Please ignore the system trying to auto-populate my email address. You're not, as I said before, students are not supposed to use their email address. What we're going to do here, and I'm going to reset this real quick just for clarity. Now, the first thing that students are going to notice is that it's asking for a password, which has not been generated. How this system works is that if you put in a login ID that does not have a password, you're going to put in the login ID and click outside the box. And what you'll notice is that the page has expanded. It's now asking you to generate a password and then asking you to confirm your first and your last name. This is how the system handles new IDs being generated. So every student will have this done once, and then you will generate a password to use later on. So let me generate the password for this student. Oh, whoops. I already violated the password rules, which are at the bottom. Oh, all right, system. You need lowercase letter, uppercase letter, number, special character. And it will obviously tell you if you don't have that. So there's the password. And again, the student first and last name must match what was put on the other page. So if you're a student that has a nickname or your teacher put some kind of pseudonym or anything, please make sure you know what the teacher put, otherwise the system won't let you in. And then once you do that and hit sign in, I am in the right spot. This is a student that has not been assigned an event. So let me just, well, we signed in basically, and this works. I'm just going to show you now. Okay, sorry. Let's go back to the student dashboard. Let's sign into a student that has tests. So that's the first login, which will work if you have tests assigned to you. Let's log into a student that has tests. So L7, that's our student number 1. You'll notice it didn't expand because I signed into this before. And we're going to log into that password. And now you see that this shows you the tests that are available to the student. I haven't generated start end times for these events. We'll focus on the top and the bottom here, where the events will show the start and end time, the status, if that's applicable. If you bounce out of a test, it'll show you how many answers are saved or completed. And if there's a blue tab available, it means that something's available for that test. Every test before it starts, you can click on and it'll bring you to an intro screen. If the test window has not started yet, you won't get a start button, but you will be able to possibly see some introductory information. We recommend that students check out this screen before the event slot starts, just to make sure there's no information given about the test that's needed before the event. But once you're here and your test is available, all you'll do is hit the start button and that'll actually start the test itself, which we're going to do right now. But I'll check to see if there are any questions before I do so. Okay. Hearing none, let's actually start the test.
I do have a quick question. Sorry about that. If a student, for instance, starts the test and loses internet and needs to reconnect, can they re-access this page?
Yes, I'll actually show you that in a minute. The short answer is yes. As long as the test has not been submitted and there is time remaining, they will be able to re-access their test.
Thank you.
That's a very good question. And a reminder for me to mention that. Thank you. So this is the test environment. And again, it's hopefully rather straightforward. This layout is designed to look like a paper test, just put into digital form. Any type of question, multiple choice, pictures, written answer will be here. Just to visually show you how this works, when you come in and you hit a button, you'll see that there may be a green answer saved on the test or not. When I hit the button itself, you'll see that there's a very quick yellow message that popped up and then it went back to green answer saved. What the system is doing is it's confirming that it has updated the answer choice. So again, if I click, you'll see again, there's a very brief message. This is the system acknowledging that the answer is saved. If say like Brooke had mentioned that your internet is lagged out, you might still see that yellow message. And if you see yellow, that means the answer has not been saved yet. But otherwise, actually taking multiple choice is easy. True, false, same thing, true or false. Now let's talk about written answers here. A little bit of a difference with a written answer is that you have to click outside the box to save the answer. I'm just going to type some gibberish here for a second. The box is going to say answer saved, but notice that you didn't see that yellow message flash across the screen at any point. That's because I have to initiate the save by clicking outside this box. And when I do, you see that it gave the yellow message indicating that it was initiating the save, and then it actually saved the answer. This is incredibly important because the system will not save your answer until you click outside that box. So if you're writing a long answer or just writing any answer for that matter, make it a habit to click outside the box on a periodic basis to make sure it saves. Last question type to mention here, multiple answers. It will indicate mark all correct answers and it'll let you click more than one box. Again, it automatically saves, same as the others. So that's actually taking the test. Let's talk about everything else on this screen. On the top right here, you'll see that there is a timer ominously clicking down towards 0 minutes. This is your time remaining on the test. Let's take a minute to talk about how this timer works. We in the system assign a base time for the test. Something like 50 minutes is common for a full event test. When you start this test, it will start that 50-minute timer. That 50-minute timer will not start until you, as the student, hit the start test button. So if you start a couple minutes late, you won't lose, this timer will not start until you start the test. However, if the test has a designated end time, the system is programmed to kick you out at that time. So for example, let's say you started the test at 1 p.m. and then the test was scheduled to end, the test block was scheduled to end at 2 p.m. This test will kick you out at 2 p.m. regardless of how much time you have remaining. We have ways in the system if we need to extend the time block to do that, but just be aware, the base time for each test will be running here, but the test block will, when the test block ends, you will still be kicked out. So you need to monitor that basically. Hopefully that makes sense. I'll go over it again if you have any questions or if I need to reiterate, but just be aware on the timer. To Brooke's question, now let's say, whoops, I accidentally logged out of that page and I've lost the test. What happens? The good news is that it's easy enough to re-access the test. I just literally went back to the Maryland page, go back to the student dashboard. We're going to log in back with that student 1 at 10:30 L7. Make sure I type in the right password. You can see that the test is still available. It says start, but you'll notice when I hit the start button, it's logged me back in and the clock has been running that entire time. So basically this test environment will continue running your clock even if you're not accessing the test. So there's no gaming the system of, oh, whoops, I need more time. Let's close out the browser and add more time to the test. That clock keeps running. And once that clock hits 0, the event will be submitted for you. So be aware of that. On this right side of the page, this is a given communication method for students to be able to use. The more important of these two boxes is the event supervisor box on the bottom. We're going to say, hello, event supervisor. You'll notice that it went through. This is team B01. So the message came from B01 and went to the event supervisor. I say this is the more important of the two because on test day, this is the only direct communication method that students have with event supervisors. So if you have a student have a question for an event supervisor, this is the way that you'll do it. And there is no other way to ask a direct question. So we'll talk on the event supervisor side about how to make sure you're seeing that. But for students, make sure you know that this is a function available. What I'll say less important of the two boxes is the message to partner box. There is no partner assigned to this actually, so the message didn't pop up. Normally there would be a message. I say it's the less important of the two because we in Maryland allow students to communicate through any method that's available to them, whether it be a phone call, something like a Discord or some other video, Zoom call, whatever. Basically, you as a student are not restricted to using this box. You can use an outside platform to communicate with other students. And we actually encourage that because it's going to be more efficient and more meaningful than typing out messages. That's going to detract from your test time. So that's available to you. But again, we allow you to use other communication methods for your test. So I've covered everything I want to on this screen. The last button is literally the finish test button, which will submit the test, which I'll show you in a moment. But I want to take time if anybody has any questions about what's on the screen before I close it out. If you have any, please, this would be a good time to ask. Okay. Well, I see and hear none. Let's see. Oh, okay. That's actually a good thing. Let's talk about that popped up. Time outside test browser. For the most part, we're going to turn that off on our tests. For the reason that I just mentioned, we allow students to use outside communication methods for their events. If you see that scary message, time outside test browser, it does not specifically mean anything in this context. It is tracking how long you've been outside the browser. And when I click back in, you see that that timer stopped. Again, we're not using that for any definitive method in Maryland. We encourage you, as always, to stay on task. Don't be opening up other browsers and blatantly cheating is the main function of that. But just to be aware that that's here. chances are your tournament director might turn that off so you don't have a nice big scary message. But just be aware that's how that works. That's funny that popped up. I was not planning on talking about that. Okay, so with no other questions, we've now completed the test. We're now going to hit finish test. It's going to give you just a verification method. We're going to hit OK, and the test has been submitted. You might get a quirky message like this that it's been submitted, but it's done. If I go back to take another test and log back into the student, time, you'll see now I cannot access this test. The test has been submitted. It will tell me how many answers have been saved, just as a sanity check for you as the student. And that's it for the test, basically. You'll rinse, lather, repeat as a student with all the other available tests, and that's how you compete on tournament day. So hopefully that part makes sense. I'll make one more stop before I talk about this Write It, Do It event down here to see if there are any other questions about the student test environment in Scilympiad. Okay. Well, if you're still typing, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, I'm going to jump into the Write It, Do It event because it's handled a little specifically in this platform. So what I'm going to do, I said before that Write It, Do It is handled as two separate events in this in Scilympiad. So what I'm doing right now is I'm logging into the writer. Now, the writer is the first half of the event where the writer is given a diagram and is tasked with writing instructions to their partner to build the structure as part of the event. So the writer is the first part. They have their own test environment. I'm going to go ahead and get that started. And how this will work is that they will be given, if it's a fully virtual event, they'll be given pictures of the structure to build, and they'll have a corresponding clock to do that. And the main function that they will do is they will type in a text box instructions for their students. So I'm just going to type something quirky here. I'm on a boat in a lake for the structure. We're going to click outside the box to make sure that saves. When this event is done, anything written in this box will be automatically transferred to the doer. And I'll show you that in just a second. It won't look like it happens, but this platform is set up and programmed for that to happen. So again, you'll spend all the time to write this. We're going to hit finish test for the sake of time now and send that. So thank you for taking the test. And I'm now going to log in to the other students and access their doer test. We're going to start that. And you'll notice that at the top of the page here, there is now the description that the partner just wrote. I'm on a boat in the lake. This is how the test, the platform transfers over the writer's instructions. So it's obviously not accessible before the test. The clock will start once that's logged in. And now the doer is tasked with physically building the structure using the instructions given by their partner. They won't actually need to submit anything. We by default have to set up a box of some sort, but in this case, it will be pictures that are submitted for this event, and that's what's going to be scored. So that's just a really quick show about how Write It, Do It is handled. That's really the only specific event that needs to be covered in this platform, because every other test, generally speaking, is handled the same way that I showed the first one, the anatomy test. If there are any specific instructions for those events, those will be given by the tournament directors. Again, this is a focus on how the platform works, so I'm not going to cover event specifics until we're done talking about Scilympiad today. But that, in a nutshell, is how you take tests in Scilympiad. So that is the focus on the coaches and the student side. Before I talk about test generation, I'll toss it up in case there are any other questions on, again, on the coaches and student side of the platform. Okay, I still see in here none. So I'm going to proceed with talking about event supervisors and volunteers and how they use this platform. So the reason that I structure the seminar this way, the first almost 40 minutes, we showed you how the student accessed their tests for that background. And now let's actually show you how event supervisors and all the other tournament volunteers generate and handle the tests. So I'm going to log into my director account now. You'll see that my tabs are different from before. The coaches tab doesn't have anything tethered to it in this case, but I have an event supervisor tab, which will be our focus for now. I'll briefly mention the score master tab in a couple minutes, but for now we're going to focus on event supervisors. How this platform works is we have to assign event supervisors to their events. So when a volunteer comes up and says they want to help with an event, they first need to create an account on this platform, which can just simply be done. I'll show that real quick. But when you log in, you can create new member and create an account. Rather straightforward. That has to be done before we assign you to an event. Once your account is in the system, we can assign you as an event supervisor. And when you hit ES tab, if you have multiple events assigned to you, you'll see a list of events sort of like I have here, each one corresponding to both a tournament as well as the event with that tournament. So be aware, if you're helping with multiple tournaments, you'll have a possibly wide number of these events available to you. So note the tournament name as well as the event when selecting an event. We're going to jump into this anatomy event that I showed before. This is now the event supervisor dashboard. Real quick, right underneath that dashboard name, you can switch between these events. So again, when you're editing an event, take note of which event's being shown. If you hit this arrow button on the right side, it'll bring you back to this menu where you can switch to a different event if you so choose. Getting ready, we're going to talk about the getting ready and the competition day tabs primarily. Getting ready is setting up tests in the environment and modifying them if needed. And then competition day is obviously what happens on competition day. So let's talk about writing tests in this platform. Creating, updating online tests. So this is obviously where you update your tests on the platform. Normally speaking, you'll just have one test available for each event. If there are multiple, that's probably because somebody's setting up a draft or something like that, or there's a resource. Make sure you know which test is the one that's you're intending to run, and that the tournament person will know that. You can change the test name if you need to. To edit the test, well, let's just show these buttons real quick. On this page, there's a little pencil button that lets you make changes to the test. You have a question mark, which lets you manage the questions. We'll get to that in a second. View student version. This is a very useful function that'll let you see what the students see on the test. We definitely recommend you review this, even if you didn't write the test, just to see how students see the test. If you want that view with a key, this is where you get your test questions with answers. The classroom, this is, we'll talk about that with the on event day function. This takes you to that messaging portal where you'll see the students' messages. We'll come back to that in a second. You can copy a test, and please don't delete a test unless you know what you're doing, but that function's available. A lot of these are intuitive into what they're indicating, but that just walks you through what's happening here. So let's actually make changes to this test. Let's click the pencil button. The first thing that pops up is a set of menus that lets you change the test name, as well as gives instructions at various levels. This instructions tab is what shows up before the students access the test. So I mentioned before that we recommend students access the test before their test time starts to see if there are any pre-event instructions that need to be given. If you as a supervisor need to give instructions, this is the tab for where to put it. Again, students will be able to see that before they start their test. The introduction box right below this is the instructions given when they open the test. So that's the message given at the very top of the test, just giving them whatever information needs to be given. There are ways to give information otherwise in the test, but this is one way you can do it. And then conclusion at the bottom, this is what they see at the end of their test. I personally like to put quirky comics and whatnot after the test is over, but I would just recommend we thank them at the very least for taking the test. Save changes, always please make sure you save changes. Let me go back to that real quick. But once you're done here, manage questions is the other main box that we're going to hit. All these other functions pretty much duplicate what I mentioned before, but we're going to jump into managing the questions. This is how you add and remove managed questions on the test. Just to walk you through what you see on this page, obviously there's actions on the left here, there's an edit, there's a delete, and then there's up and down arrows that let you move the questions up and down one slot each. So if I wanted to move what's listed as question 1 up a slot, you hit the green button and it moves it up. A much more thorough way to handle the ordering on your test is this list order. What this platform does is it assigns a list order number to each question. And by modifying that list order number, you can change where that question goes in the test. It goes from low to high. So list order of 10 will appear first, then 50, then 90, etc. These numbers don't specifically mean anything apart from being a general order. So you as a writer or even modifying a test can set this up however you want. Just keep in mind, if I modified this where I change the list order to 70, that means it'll pop up between the questions that are 50 and 90. It adds spacing in the platform just so you can insert questions later on. But that is a thorough way to handle it. We don't care about category very much. Points is obviously the number of points assigned to a question. We'll go through that in a second. Question type and question itself, you'll modify inside the question. So let's actually jump into modifying a question. Let's start with this first block, which doesn't have a question number by design. This is a text block. Like in any good test, sometimes you need to give information that's not correlated to a question. How we recommend you do that is by adding a text block. Set the number of points to 0, obviously, but then it'll make it so that it's not a question that students answer, it's just pure information. How you do that, make something a text block, is by clicking the question type here and going down to text block at the bottom. All these other types of questions are obviously questions that are intended to be answered. They're pretty straightforward. Multiple choice is multiple choice, true, false, multiple answer. Fill in the blank, we really recommend you don't use. This is intended if you want students to write an answer that's automatically matched by the platform. The problem is that the platform does not account for syntax errors or punctuation, capitalization differences. It's a pure like-for-like match that has a lot of faults to it potentially. So if you want students to give an answer, we recommend you do a short answer essay every time. That way you have to manually grade it. But that's up to you and up to the tournament how they wish to handle it. And cryptography, that's only relevant to code busters. So unless you're doing code busters, you don't need to worry about that. Oh, I see a question. Our exam has several fill in the blank questions for them to answer. Can we manually review these after the fact? Yes, I will show you that later on. You as a grader, event supervisor, have the ability to manually edit the points assigned to question, even if the platform already tries to assign an answer. So there's plenty of chance for review after the fact. So I hope that answers your question. For a calculation, would you still suggest an essay? I would. This platform doesn't let you put a range of numbers. So if you allow any kind of, like, say 1 to 5, this platform doesn't let you do a range. It would only look for a specific answer. And again, if there's any syntax difference, if they try to put units where it's not wanted or vice versa, the question will be marked incorrectly. And from just a review standpoint, we recommend that you just review the answers manually to make sure there's no discontinuities. Awesome, good question. So let's save that. Let's actually go into the other question. So this is pretty intuitive, but just to point out, literally when you give it a question type, you'll put the question at the top. It'll generally prompt you for what to put down here. Obviously, if it's multiple choice, you put various answers. You have options down to F, and then it'll have you indicate which option is correct. Things you can put in here, you have a little bit of control over formatting, so you can bold, underlined, etc. There's a little bit of ability to do equations, although you can also think about copying and pasting equations as text if it gets too complicated. You can put rudimentary tables here. You can put links on here if you so desire. If you're intending on putting links, we highly recommend you check with tournament directors, because we need to keep in mind that students can only access certain external sites. So if we're intending on having students access external sites for the test, we really need to vet it that the students can actually get to that page. So if you plan on putting links, please contact me or the tournament director to make sure that's there. Putting a file, this is how you put, say, an image in. So that one of the images I had before, this is how you input it in, relatively straightforward. Keep in mind that the resolution might not be as big as you want it. So try not to put images that are either too small or that have too fine details. If you need an image that has very fine details, we can talk about ways that we also upload it to a Google Drive so that students can access it as like a PDF, just to make sure they get all the detail out of it that they need. But otherwise, those are the general ways that you write questions. Again, multiple choice, true, false will ask you for true, false. Multiple answers, this is where you indicate which answers are correct or not. Please don't use multiple answers for questions that only have one answer. This system has a funky algorithm for how it penalizes students for incorrect answers under this format. So really only use multiple answers if there's actually multiple answers associated with a question. And then, like I said, fill in the blank. Please try not to use this. We really recommend you use the short answer essay, where you'll just get the text block that the students put. And then you can grade it from there. And just to cover the other top part of the screen, make sure you assign the number of points assigned to a question. Text blocks, it tries to give a number of points by default, so make sure text blocks are 0. We don't care about difficulty level. That's just for some other function that we don't use. List order, I mentioned that before, where you can edit the order in the test manually. The other important ones to mention are at the end here. Tie order. We in Science Olympiad are not allowed to have ties at any level of the competition. If students are tied on a test, we must break that tie. And the easiest way to do this is to designate tiebreaker questions. So for example, if you want this question that we're on to be the first tiebreaker on the test, you'll come to the tie order number and hit the number 1. And we're gonna save that. And now coming back to the test order list here, we now have, this is tie order number 1. What'll happen now when the platform evaluates the rank order, if students are tied, it'll look to this question and see if it can break the overall tie that way. So it's a really easy way to have a built-in tiebreaker. Good tests will often have up to maybe 3 or 4 of these built in. You as a grader and event supervisor will need to manually break ties beyond this because again, we can't have ties in general. But again, we recommend you build your tests with a few tiebreakers in, just so there's a very quick automated way to do it. And the last thing to note here is the skip button. This is really mainly used if during test day, you find out that you need to throw out a question for any reason. Say it's on an invalid topic, we find out after the fact. The easiest way to do it is to come into this test environment and hit skip. And what that'll do is it'll automatically not add any points to the overall student scores for this question. Really, this would only be done after communicating with the tournament staff. So probably don't use that function without talking to tournament staff first. But that is a way to remove a question from a test without physically deleting it. So I think I've talked about everything I need to on actually designing the test. Takes a few minutes to get used to, but it's otherwise intuitive. Any questions on this environment before we go on? Ooh, nice one. 3 more questions. We have chunked some of our questions. Is there a good way to indicate that on the online exam platform? Brooke, that's where I would recommend using text blocks. I would just add a text block in between each section just to say, you know, which type of, in anatomy in particular, you'd have the 3 different sections of anatomy on that test for that year. You can put a text block and just say this, you know, this is this section. That'd be the easiest way to do it. Is there a way for students to submit a picture of their own? So students submitting pictures, I'd say let's talk more about that offline. This platform does not really allow students to submit pictures directly to the graders. that would probably need to be done through like a Google Drive, or allowing them to email it. Anytime the students send files to us, we have to keep in mind that students can only access certain platforms by their district policy. So the easiest thing to do would be to say, hey, we're going to throw a Google Drive link and submit your picture that way. But what happens is that we find students sometimes can't access the Google Drives that we give. In that case, we would give them an alternate option. Like I said, email would probably be the simplest thing. But let's talk more about that offline, especially once I start to see kind of your test as it comes. We can talk about that more. And then, yeah, unfortunately, we find out the hard way that every district, again, has different tolerances for what they allow students to do on their systems. There are ways to do this. It just becomes, hey, is this important to do? And let's make sure we do it thoroughly. And then your third question, do we need to indicate to students which questions are the tiebreakers? Highly recommended. You do not have to, but it is a very fair thing to do to the students to say this question is your tiebreaker. For a long test, I can imagine these students should be placed. Yeah, it's up to you where to place them. Two things I will note. The first and more important thing, do not add questions that are purely for tie-breaking purposes. They should award points in the overall test as well, and then also be a tiebreaker. Just to clarify, what we've seen before is that writers will add questions at the very end of a test where they say, these don't count towards overall score, but they will allow you to break ties if you get to it. We do not want that. We don't want students to question, should we spend time on a tiebreaker question or on a question that counts towards the test overall? The question should award points and should also be a tiebreaker. And for a long test, this is where I would say indicate where the tiebreaker questions are. Then the students can make decisions about the priority that they get to them. Yeah, don't just put them all at the end. I would recommend put them throughout. But again, indicate in the question this is a tiebreaker. And then the students, as part of their test strategy, can decide whether or not it's important enough to jump to that question. So I think those are your questions. Anything else, Brooke, that I didn't get to in that text block, or any other questions? All good.
So Robert, if I may, I actually have one comment and two technical questions.
Go for
the
it.
comment is, so Brooke, your question about the tiebreaker. So as far as I remember, if you assign your tiebreaker in the system actually does automatically add this tiebreaker definition after the question number. For instance, the students will see question number 17 and then parenthetically tiebreaker 1. So this is what the system does, as far as I remember. So yeah, that will be right after the question, right after the number and then the number of points.
Unfortunately, Sergey, that's not true in this. Sorry, Sergey, to interrupt. That's not true in this platform, unfortunately. I just brought up the student's test, and that question doesn't say tiebreaker. So it needs to be manually added.
Then it needs to be manually added. And then two technical questions. So Robert, I remember last year there were some issues copy pasting questions, so like text blocks from Word files into this system.
Oh, that's a very good question. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, so if you're copying and pasting text from a text document, make sure you paste as plain text. So that should be available when you right click or whichever platform you're on, paste it as plain text. And what that does, it gets to Sergey's point where any formatting that say Microsoft Word adds, it will make sure that that doesn't interfere with how the question is presented, especially with it like any, yes, I'll leave it at that. That is a very good point to bring up, Sergey. Thank you. And you had one other question.
Yeah, and my last question, this is regarding to test questions that assume multiple answers. Mm-hmm. Is there any sort of word of wisdom? So what would be your guidelines, Robert, to the point of how best to figure out the scoring approach to questions like this? Because, admittedly, if you have, let's say, 5 choices, only 2 of them are correct, then, multiple combinations of wrong and right choices are possible. So, what's the best approach to, scoring, strategy so that there's a consistency when these questions are scored?
So the basic way that this platform scores multiple questions is that every correct answer, so it breaks up the number of points for the test for the answer and breaks it up where, okay, sorry, let me explain it this way. Let's say a question has 3 correct answers. It'll take the total points available for that question, and for every correct response that's given, it gives a third of the total points. So tell you what, let me do it this way. Let's say you have let's say you have ABCD. This is a 3-point question, let's say overall, and you have ABCD available. If it's anytime a student says A, B, or C, it awards them 1/3 of the total points. So if this is a 3-point question, if they answer A, they get 1 point. If they answer B, they get 1 point. If they answer C, they get a point, and that gives you your 3 points. If they answer D, the system dings them for that exact same fraction of the total points. So say, for example, again, 3-point question, let's say they answer all 4 and only A, B, C are supposed to be correct. They're going to be awarded 2 points by the system for that question, meaning you get your point for the correct answer of A, you get the point for the correct answer of B, you get the point for the correct answer of C, but you lose a point for the incorrect answer of D. The reason I describe it this way is this fraction, basically the students are rewarded and punished the same amount for giving a correct answer and giving a wrong answer. The conclusions we've drawn from this: number 1, don't set up a multiple choice question that only has 1 correct answer. What that does essentially is if the student gives any wrong answer, they get no credit for the question whatsoever. Make sure there's multiple possible correct answers. The other guidance I'm going to give in general is that if you have multiple answer questions as part of your test, you as the event supervisor should talk with your grading staff about how you want those to be graded. You do have the ability to override the system's grading mechanism in a manual method. You could say, maybe say, okay, they get 1 point for every correct answer and you want half a point off if they give a wrong answer. You can manually override that, but it needs to be done consistently and obviously throughout all the tests. My recommendation basically on that side is either accept what the platform does or make sure you have a very defined mechanism for how you want these graded after, when you're grading it. Because if you're manually overriding it, again, it comes to it's your responsibility to make sure they're graded correctly. So that's going a little bit more into that side. Does that cover everything worth talking about on that, Sergey?
Yes, I believe so. And also one small addition to what I just said about multiple answer questions. So I believe the general consensus is not to give negative points, right? Like for instance, if both negative answers or incorrect answers have been chosen, so it doesn't really mean that the student will be given -2 points.
Students should never get more than 0 points for a question, pretty much, period. This platform will not subtract points, but you as an event supervisor should not subtract points overall in the test for if they give more wrong answers than correct answers on a multiple answer.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. Hopefully that makes sense. This is we ran into quirks with this last year. So we can obviously help if you have more questions on this particular topic. Last year was obviously, we have a lot of experience because we've used this for a year now. So this will be part of our test review. We'll go through and make sure everything looks good on our end. We'll give comments and make sure everything looks good before test day. Okay. So I think that's all I want to say about test generation. Let me make sure there's nothing that I'm missing here. I'll just show real quick, again, you can preview a test with the key. It'll show the correct answers. That's an easy way to have the key available for grading tests if you want to have that. So let's, okay. That's really the only thing I'll use under the Getting Ready tab. Let's actually move into the Competition Day tab. And let's start where we left off with the actual tests we created. Let's actually look to grade them. So this is the Grading Test tab. There's a bunch of information that's given here. First off, this tab is useful to look at in real time while a test is being taken. You'll see that obviously this team submitted their test, but while they're taking their test, you'll actually be able to see in a bit of real time what their progress is. If I slide over to the Questions Answered tab, you'll be able to see how many questions every team has answered that is taking this test. And this screen will have every test currently available. So you'll get a bit of real-time information as to when they started, what their end time was, or how long they've gone, how many questions they've answered. It's a really useful tab to have open. It's one of the two we recommend you have open during the test. But for grading tests, you'll come in here and assuming the test has been submitted, you'll hit the grade this button. So this will show you the test that they've submitted. Now, a lot of this is done, there's a bunch that's done automatically for you. Just to slide down real quick, for any true, false, multiple choice, or multiple answer questions, excuse me, the platform will automatically try to grade it for you. In this case, the student answered true and the answer was true, so the system awarded 1 point for that question. You'll be able to see the little green star up near the top of the question. If it's full, that indicates that it awarded full points for the question. If it's a half full green star, that means partial credit was awarded. And if it's an empty star, I don't have any empty stars here, but if it's either a red X or an empty star, that means 0 points were awarded or it was skipped. You always have the ability to change the number of points awarded for a question. It is as simple as typing in a number, hitting change points, and then it'll tell you points saved. And then if I refresh this, you'll see that awarded points was updated. Use this power sparingly and only as needed, because the one fault of this platform is that we as the tournament staff don't get an automatic note if you changed a score. We'd be able to see it after the fact, but we only see essentially what the points awarded for a question is, as do you. And just to note, since I said the question was wrong, it did put a red X next to the question. So that's how the system indicates that the question has been marked incorrect. Going back up here, sometimes you'll see a red pen, and then you'll kind of see that this question is in a little bit of a red hue. That means the system has not done any automatic grading and that you need to manually grade it. I forgot to point out this what do you call it, guide?
Legend.
Yes, that's the word, thank you. The legend is up at the top. So red pen means manual grading. That's because this was a short answer. What you put in the key will be put as the expected answer, but you get to award the number of points based off of whichever scale you're using. We do recommend, I didn't say this when I was doing test writing, we do recommend that you put a bit of as thorough a key as you can when talking about essay answers. The reason for that is simply being, we as tournament staff need to be able to pick up a test and understand how a test was graded. So if there's partial points that are possible, we need that in the key. Obviously, you can't write any more notes when putting a score, in which case we would ask questions if needed. But that helps just to have a key that's thorough, just saying, if this, then this. But as far as grading goes, again, for this, you just simply put in the number of points, hit save. You'll see if I refresh this page that this updated because it was graded now. And then grading a test is as simple as going through and doing this until everything is graded. So we're just going to save this. And then when everything has been graded, you can hit the done grading button down here. You'll notice that back on the grading test tab that team has been changed to a green color and has been awarded a score. You can at any time go back into the pencil and change the grading or just review it. But your goal as an event supervisor is to get all these bars to a green color. And that's obviously done once all tests are submitted. And that's how tests are graded in this platform. We recommend with grading that grading is done where we call it horizontal grading, where each section of a test is given to a different volunteer to grade. That way, multiple people aren't accessing the same test and changing things at the same time. You'll see this platform again, because it's just how things are saved. We recommend that tests are only accessed by one event supervisor, by one grader at a time, and each section is graded by a different event supervisor for consistency. Is grading done on a student by student basis? Yes. Like you saw how it's graded, where it's literally you access one test, you'll go through and grade it, and then hit done grading. So it's one test at a time. Is there also an option to grade on a question by question basis? That Brooke, that's what I was mentioning about the horizontal grading, where we recommend that you and any other volunteers that are grading tell each other, you're grading this section, you know, I'm grading this section, you're grading these questions, you're grading these questions, and then have them accessing different tests so that nobody is accessing the same test and kind of overriding another person's work. If you're a lead event supervisor, it's your job to review everything at the end, but that's how I would recommend tackling having multiple people grading at the same time. So I hope that answers your question. How many tests can we expect to be grading? So, oh gosh, Sergey, what's the number of teams again? It's like 30 something for the Montgomery College Regional?
3 as far as I remember it.
So yeah, so the maximum you'd be grading for an event is 30. Chances are not every event will have every team participating. So just a ballpark would be guess in the 20s. I will say that, Brooke, your events tend to have more student participation because they're common events in middle and high school. But that's kind of my estimation for you. Okay. So that's grading tests. I want to back up real quick. Oh, sorry, before we leave this, break ties, if any. So if this system hasn't broken ties, sorry, back up one more step. So, okay, breaking ties. Again, one of the main rules of grading tests is we cannot have ties. The easiest way to break ties is to make it so that to change the scores, essentially. So let's see. Okay, I'm not going to do that here. Basically, there's a break ties button that will try to break ties if there are any. We actually don't really use this very much. You can, there are better ways to actually do this. So I'm almost going to pretend I didn't talk about that, and we're going to talk about breaking ties in a different way. So if we need to break ties and you run out of tiebreakers, we can talk about that. Hopefully the system should automatically update the scores so that the ties are broken. Let's put it that way. And I'll show you in a minute how you can manually change scores if you want to, if we need to break ties further than what you've programmed into the test. Okay, let's go back a quick section, because the one other important thing that I didn't cover is what you're actually doing during the event running. We've talked about grading the tests, but let's talk about how the students are communicating with you. So here we go, start. So let's look at the classroom button. I showed before the student platform side where we saw that the students have one mechanism to message their event supervisors and staff personnel, and that's that little chat box in their window. When I come to that classroom button under the event supervisor tab, this is where I can see their messages. So we literally saw what I typed before, hello event supervisor. The notation here, it always shows where the message came from and who it went to. So BO1, it's from team BO1, and then it went to event supervisor. There are a couple ways that you can respond to this team. And it's usually simply just clicking on the message itself, where it will give you the option to send to BO1 only, or you can always click under the list of full teams on the left-hand side, and you'll get the same box. So if I go in here and say, hello, BO1, and hit to BO1 only, you'll see now that that message came from ES and went to BO1. So pretty straightforward how that works. If you need to broadcast a message, this can be done at any time, including before the event, although we've seen hit or miss if a message is broadcasted before an event, that message pops up for all teams. So we recommend broadcasting only once the event block starts. That said, you can broadcast a message by properly typing hello all teams and hitting broadcast. And now that message has gone out to all teams. They receive a nice little ping sound, and they know that the event supervisor has reached out to all teams. This is the most important window to be looking at during the test block, because again, there's no other communication method with the students. So at minimum, one volunteer should be on here. We'll talk about how you communicate with tournament staff beyond that, but with students, that's how that works. So during the actual test, this is usually my test setup, where I have the chat box in one side, and then I'm constantly refreshing the test progress on the other side just to see how everything's progressing. So Hopefully that makes sense. Any questions on interacting with students or what to be doing during tests? Well, thank you, Brooke. That's very kind. Trial and error, let's put it that way on how this works. So, okay, so that's during the event. Let's go back to event supervisor. That's the classroom. We've talked about grade online tests. We want all these tests scored. And when that's done, now you'll come down to the event scoring tab under competition day. What'll happen here is that any scores that were on the graded test tab will auto-populate onto this tab here. So it'll make it really easy, hopefully, where it'll just list the scores. There's a lot of manual input you can have on this page. So literally you could just take the score and put it to be whatever you want. It'll let you override what was on the previous page. If I save changes, now their score is 78. So if there are any edits that need to be made after the fact, this is where you do it. And I mentioned before, if you need to manually break a tie, this is the easiest place to do it. And how we typically do it is we just add a little bit of a fraction of a point like that. So let me just prove the point here real quick. I'm going to make two of these scores 78. Now, you see that bright yellow window? This is the system telling you that there's a tie that needs to be broken. So the easiest way to do this and how we typically do it is just simply add a fraction of a point. 0.01, 0.1, whatever works best for the event. Save the changes, and now the tie is broken. So that is literally a very straightforward way to resolve that. What this menu will do is it will let you put scores into rank order. So let me save another score. If I come over here and say show ranking, it will now put the scores into rank order, where this third team now obviously has the top score and it goes down. This is a great verification method to make sure that everything transferred over correctly. And we recommend that you just review it at this point before you come to score counseling, just to make sure that everything checks out with what you want. Once you've done that, once you've completed this page, verified the ranking, go to checkout. What checkout will do is it gives you a default set of tasks to make sure that everything has been double checked. It's just messages like, have you gone through and graded all tests? Hopefully so. Have you validated all these question types, et cetera, et cetera. I can let you read through this. But what we want you to do basically, before you come to score counseling, you should go through all these, literally check the boxes, and then put your name down at the bottom that you completed it and hit submit. Oh, sorry. This is the point, I should point out this box. This is a very good box if you have any notes about the event, whether it was tiebreakers, whether it was funky things that happened. Please use this box however you wish, and to put down any and all notes, because this is what's stored in the system. For now, I'm just going to put no ties and then hit submit for function. So at that point, now you've completed a major step because you have now graded all your tests and submitted to submitted to the scoring room. So that is major portion, that is the majority of the job done. The last step is now to go to score counseling, where we'll review the scores with you. And I'll talk about that in just a second, but I want to open up for questions just to make sure I didn't skip over something important. Okay, seeing none, let's go to that last step and let's talk about score counseling. Most volunteers won't have the Score Master tab, but I'm going to show it just so you see what we see on our side. We have a lot more functions to be able to interact with all the events. We can obviously modify the test. We can modify most of the tests, et cetera, et cetera. And what we're going to talk about now is the Review Lock Scores button. So when you submit your scores to the scoring room, we see a nice little checkbox here where we see that the event supervisor has checked out. Excuse me. That's our indication that, hey, you're finished with your round of grading and you're going to come to us for score counseling. What score counseling is going to do, you see that, sorry, when I hit on the event, it literally brings up the same screens that you as the event supervisor had access to and worked with. We're going to work with you to verify that everything makes sense. It's not meant to question, it's just meant so that we as tournament staff understand what happened and are able to account for it. Because again, once you walk out of the room, we might still have questions that need to be answered about tests. So we'll go through this with you, make sure everything was done. When we go to the event supervisor checkout page, again, we have the same checkout list that you do. There is a very solid chance that we will spend time auditing various tests with you. My practice when I do score counseling is that I literally go into the view tests, start to scroll through. I will ask questions of the event supervisor, just be like, why did you grade it this way? Make sure that it makes sense. And then just verify that everything was done correctly and rigorously, and most importantly, fair to the students. Once that's done, it'll take a good, like, I don't want to say half hour. That's a long amount of time. Brooke, especially for your test, I would say 15 minutes probably is sufficient per event. But we'll spend a few minutes like making sure everything looks good. And then once that's done, we're going to hit the event is good to go button and lock the scores. Once the scoring room has done that, you get the nice little keep the padlock button on this event, meaning it is done. At that point, you are good to go for the day. And basically we'll get a contact information from you in case we have questions after the fact. But that is the point that you're done. So please make sure to account for score counseling as part of your tournament day protocol. Yeah, that's what I want to say about that. Let me see, anything else I need to mention here? I don't think there's anything I need to mention here. Just to point out, the victory button we have is this enable disable scoring. This is what we hit on the tournament side when all events have been submitted for the day. Like I said, it's our victory button, so it comes with much aplomb and then a quick sprint to go get dinner usually. So that's just what we do on our tournament side. So I think I've covered most of the event supervisor information. Are there any questions on event supervising, test writing, test running that I haven't covered? Okay. Hearing none, the last thing for me to mention is just a little bit of the tournament day logistics. How we operate a fully virtual tournament is we operate it through a Zoom call, a giant Zoom call where we have a number of breakout rooms assigned essentially to each event, and then a few extra rooms for various purposes. What our volunteers will do is they will call in to the main room, inform the staff that are there and say, I'm this person and I'm here for this event. And then we're going to assign you to a breakout room. At any point, because you're in a breakout room, you have the ability to come back to the main room to ask the tournament staff questions. And we'll be there throughout the whole tournament day. So basically, you'll have a room dedicated to interact with your fellow volunteers. The tournament staff will be going through and just making sure everything's okay. And you'll have the ability to come back to the main room and get help in whatever mechanism you need. So we'll be there, like I said, all day. That's the one grace of a virtual tournament is going and helping people is a lot easier than physically going to a room in a building. So hopefully, if you have any questions on tournament day, we'll be there for you. And hopefully it's a nice, smooth, straightforward process. That ES will need to leave their contact. Yes, we'll lead event supervisors. We'll ask for your phone numbers. That'll generally happen on tournament day, if not beforehand. And our general policy is until events are locked, or sorry, if we have to audit, if we have, I'm not using the right word, sorry. If we have an appeal, a formal appeal from a coach, what will happen is that we will need to reach out to the event supervisor to get written feedback from them on that question. That's such a contextual question that I can't really go in, that I can't say any more details at this point. But just note that within 24 hours, we may reach out to you in case we have any questions. It typically doesn't pan out that way, but I'm going to knock on wood just in case. But that's the Sergey's point, just about the phone numbers. And I think that's the majority of what I need to talk about. Does anybody have any questions on any topic really that I haven't covered? Okay. Well, if there are no other questions here, there's one other event-specific thing I want to talk about, but I'm going to close out the recording before I do that. So for those watching online, thank you so much. Good luck to your good luck on your tournaments. And look out for more specific information from your tournament directors regarding your specific tournaments. And yeah, good luck. And I'm going to end the recording. So